A town nearly forgotten once gave Chinese immigrants a community to call home for over 2 decades. Locke, California, a rural town located south of Sacramento, provided a community to Chinese immigrants that have been barred from living their lives freely in America. During the mid-19th century, the United States experienced a mass migration of immigrants from several Asian countries, including China, due to the 1849 gold rush. This influx of people took over much of the jobs of unskilled labor that existed in America. Many became laborers in mines and railroads, helping construct the Central Pacific Railroad in the late 19th century. American natives began to resent the Chinese, feeling that they'd come in and taken the jobs that could have been theirs. Throughout the 19th century, the United States passed a variety of laws to lay a heavier burden on Asian immigrants. For example, Chinese immigrants were barred from receiving a business permit from the United States government. Only white applicants were granted business permits. The practice of denying business permits was later deemed illegal and unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court in 1886. The United States Congress also passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. The Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 forbid Chinese immigrants from coming into the United States. Chinese immigrants later received harsh discrimination and interrogation on Angel Island, an immigration station in San Francisco. Chinese immigrants were often detained for several months to several years. Throughout the early 1900s, states placed additional restrictions on Chinese immigrants' ability to own property. The California Alien Land Law Act of 1913 barred Chinese immigrants from the right to own land, forcing them to compromise and lease properties. Despite this conflict, Chinese immigrants' strong sense of community led to the creation of the town of Locke, California. On October 7, 1915, a fire broke out in the Chinese section of the town of Walnut Grove through the introduction of a lighted cigarette into a cleaning establishment. Because the Chinese were resented, they were forced to move out of Walnut Grove and were left with nowhere to live. This led to the start of a historic compromise known as Locke, California. Because of the Alien Land Law Act of 1913, Chinese immigrants were unable to purchase land. The Alien Land Law Act of 1913 stated that all aliens ineligible to citizenship under the laws of the United States may acquire, possess, enjoy, transmit, and inherit real property. Despite this conflict, a group of Chinese merchants from Walnut Grove, led by Li Bing and his partners, constructed an under-the-table compromise with George Locke with the hope of rebuilding their community. George Locke was a trading pioneer and wealthy landowner. Locke agreed to the leasing of 14 acres of land to a portion of the Chinese community. This verbal compromise specified a monthly rate of $5 for a single-story house and $10 for a commercial or two-story building.
They had to agree that they would never own the land, that it would simply be rented to them on a parcel-by-parcel basis. So that meant if you owned a building on Main Street, which was generally 2 stories, every single month, somebody from the town would come around and collect $10 from you, or if you lived in one of the single family dwelling, single-story buildings back on Key Street, you would pay $5. And so this went on throughout the history of Locke.
Locke, California became a rural agricultural community which displayed a strong sense of community that allowed Chinese immigrants to create a home which they were able to call their own. By the 1920s, the Delta had a great business boom, leading to population growth. In 1925, Locke was expanding even faster as the Southern Pacific Railroad Company enlarged the packing shed across the street from Locke. More than 600 Chinese people were believed to live in the town of Locke at the time. A longtime resident of Locke, Wang Yao, recalls his circumstances while living in the town in the mid-1920s.
Locke was a Chinese town. There were very few places suitable for us to live in like that. There were no Caucasians in town. The houses were all property of local Chinese businessmen here.
Locke's residents predominantly included a mix of single men and families, giving the small community a unique essence. Former residents recall the social division between the single men and the town's families. Harry Sen, born in 1933, described the atmosphere in Locke during his childhood.
Locke is a very small town, and in the evenings, they all lined up on the benches on the main street and sit and talk. The time that I intermingled with them was when my dad hired them to work in the farm, and then I'd go talk to them when I'm working with my dad on the farm. But there were very little interaction between us people and the bachelors.
Those with families had a much different lifestyle than those without. Connie King, who spent much of her childhood in neighboring town Isleton before moving to Locke in the 1940s, mentioned that her parents left home for weeks at a time for work, leaving her and her siblings alone.
We were so poor that my father and mother had to go out of the town, left us alone at our home, and they go out to other cities to look for work. So I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I took care of my 2 brothers and my sister, and I cook for them, I clean house, and I wash clothes, and I pack their lunch to go to school and make sure they go to school. So my mother come home maybe once a month to check on us to see if we need any money to buy food.
Locke's residents represented the essence of the Chinese immigrant experience in America.
Due to the racism, the segregation, and the 1913 Alien Land Act, she was repeatedly told she could not buy the house that she really wanted because she was Chinese. That the 1913 Alien Land Act was wrong and it needed to be changed, and the people who owned buildings in Locke, their homes in Locke, like she and her husband Tommy did, that they should be able to own the land where their building was.
However, in the 1950s, as more young Chinese Americans gained in education, Locke's population rapidly decreased. The government later shut down all illegal gambling businesses, which led to a further decrease in population, followed by many merchants vacating the town of Locke. Only 8 Chinese people reside in the town of Locke today. Despite the conflict of the California Alien Land Law Act of 1913, Locke survived after many rural Chinese communities perished, reflecting a sense of community that was evident for many years. Although many second-generation Chinese Americans moved to the cities for better economic opportunities, others remained in Locke where they only spoke Chinese and ignored the interventions of the modern world. Today, Locke is a National Historic Landmark representing one of the only rural agricultural Chinese American communities in America. The remaining residents of the town of Locke have recently purchased the land under their buildings and houses. Locke still looks very much like it was nearly a century ago. It has withstood the threats of fire, floods, and continues to go through poverty, discrimination, and neglect. Although many of Locke's storefronts, facades, and homes have been ruined, the Locke Foundation sets out to repair and restore Locke structures back to the way they looked, to preserve their historic appearance. Locke was the only ethnic Chinese community that was not attached to an existing town, making the town of Locke the safest and most secure community for Chinese immigrants.
Locke is the largest, most complete example of a rural, agricultural Chinese American community in the United States. The major significance, in my opinion, of Locke is its legacy to the Chinese who, in the early 20th century, had to endure the pain of poverty and neglect and alienation from their mother country, to come here to California in the United States and end up thriving and ultimately prospering.
The County of Sacramento, California understood the need to protect an important cultural resource that is Locke, California. The town of Locke, California was the first of its kind to compromise towards the need of the Chinese immigrants to create a safe and unique community despite facing harsh conflicts such as the California Alien Land Law Act of 1913.